but first I will introduce you. So, we have Liam Foran, the CEO of the Peace Dividends Initiative, Anya Neystat, Legal Director of the Clooney Foundation for Justice, and Laurent Richard, Founder and Executive Director of Forbidden Stories. Welcome. So we will hear about 3 different ways through which you're trying to tackle the different challenges that we've discussed earlier. But before focusing on solutions, let's first start with the problem. So Anya, you're the legal director of the Clooney Foundation for Justice, and you have over 2 decades of experience protecting human rights, including at Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. Through this work, you have led investigations in numerous countries that have been affected by war. How does the link between conflict and the environment manifest itself in some of the countries where you have worked?
Thank you very much. That's better. It's an honor to be part of this important conversation. Thank you. Indeed, I have worked in multiple conflict and crisis areas over the last 2 decades, including some that have been mentioned by Hannah already. So I think to answer your question very specifically, I would give 2 very different examples. One that, of course, you all know or at least heard about, which is Ukraine. It has been a significant part of our work at the Clooney Foundation over the last year. We focus on a variety of war crimes and potential crimes against humanity committed there. But it's, of course, as Hannah mentioned briefly, also an example of how ongoing conflict, ongoing war causes long-lasting environmental damage, and in some situations pushes us closer to actual disasters. Let's remember that Ukraine is a country with 15 active nuclear reactors, and some of the fighting was happening very close to them. But not only that, there were already hits on multiple chemical storages, fuel depots that led to enormous fires, some of which has been widely reported, others not so much. And of course, that causes direct damage to the quality of air and soil and water. Especially last year in summer and in the autumn, there have been massive fires, sometimes intentional, sometimes just as a result of the fighting, that led to devastation of crops and in some cases long-lasting damage to agricultural lands, and so on and so forth, and we will see it unfortunately continuing going forward. I think we will talk further about solutions, but I wanted to give you another example briefly, which I'm pretty sure most of you have not heard about, and it's not what is usually quoted in this context, and that's a small nation of Nauru in the Pacific Ocean, which is, well, I wouldn't say close to Australia, but that's probably just to give you a sense of where it's geographically located. And that's an island that was absolutely devastated by exploration of phosphate mines. So essentially, the entire island was dug out with people only living on the edges along the coastal line. And that went on for several decades, leading to absolute economic collapse of the country, which in turn allowed Australia essentially to turn this island into its offshore prison for refugees. So for years, what Australia did is sent refugees who were trying to arrive by boats to Australia to this island where they were held in absolutely horrendous conditions, which I documented at that time for Amnesty International, and where we concluded that these are conditions that amount to torture. So these are two very different examples of consequence and cause, and I suppose we'll talk more about what to do about those types of situations.
Thank you, Anya. Laurent, you're the founder and executive director of Forbidden Stories. It's a consortium of journalists who are devoted to continuing the work of journalists who have been assassinated. Countries where conflict and environmental exploitation for economic gains intersect usually are very dangerous for journalists to operate in, because private sector intersects with interests of armed groups and corrupt governments. So could you give us an example of a case you've worked on that exemplifies the connections between conflict and the environment?
Yes, absolutely. And first of all, thank you for having me and Forbidden Stories part of that very important conversation. Very important conversation because, as you may know, more and more journalists, environmental defenders are killed because of those environmental crimes, and because they try to investigate that, and they are suffering a lot of threats, receiving a lot of threats, and sometimes have been killed for that. And over the past years with Forbidden Stories, we have continued some of their work in India, for instance, continuing the work of Jagendra Singh, who was investigating the sand mafia in Uttar Pradesh state in India, and he was killed for that. People set fire on Jagendra, and he was killed for that. In Tanzania, we were investigating a gold mine company who were providing golds for all the Silicon Valley, including the Apple company, and some Tanzanian journalists were forced to exile because of the level of threats they were receiving, because they wanted to investigate about the pollution of that mine. And to give you one very recent example of how difficult it is, and it is more and more difficult for journalists to investigate that, let's talk about the case of Rafael Moreno. So Rafael Moreno he was a Colombian journalist. He was killed in October 22, so a few months ago. And Rafael contacted us a week before his killing. He contacted us because he was more and more concerned about the threats he was receiving. Rafael was based in north of Colombia, in the state of Colombia, and he was precisely at this intersection of drug cartels, the clan of Golfo, corrupted businessmen, and corrupted politicians. And he was precisely investigating the contracts from the municipalities and how the clan of Golfo was getting money from that. And he was threatened because of all of that. And at the heart of his investigation, he was investigating the illegal mining of some companies. He was investigating disease caused by the activity, the illegal activity of some mining companies over there. And he was one of the who was, despite the threats, who was continuing to do that, and he gave his life for that. So we're going to talk after about solution and what we can do, what kind of reaction we can have for that. But and in that case of Rafael, we team up with a lot of reporters to continue his work, and we published the Rafael project a few months ago. But clearly, as we are all here to question ourselves about what to change, what could be the solution, before thinking of that, we need information. And the reporters are doing that. This is our job, to collect information and to tell the stories, to make the stories available for the public opinion. So if the journalists are threatened for that, there is a big issue. So this is why we need to find solution for that.
Thank you. Laurent's account of what happened to Rafael Moreno shows the way economic actors fuel the violence. With your work, I think you're trying to write a different story, one where actually the private sector supports peace. So how do you do that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Maud, and fellow panelists for outlaying the problem. I think it's pretty clear that competition over natural resources, over forests, over water, over minerals and things like that can have a serious potential to drive conflict. And we really see that economic actors need to play a critical role in actually the solutions for conflict over the next couple of decades. How we're trying to approach that, we're approaching it a couple of different ways, but it might be worth saying a few things about, you know, how peace is negotiated and the role that the private sector actors play. That actually, when you're involved in a peace negotiation process, it's critical to have the private sector involved there, because it's often left out. And one of the things that the parties to a conflict, whether it's a really local conflict or whether it's a high-level political conflict, they will be fighting over the spoils of war and access to natural resources and jobs. So it's critical that economics plays a role when we're thinking about conflicts and thinking about solving them. The other thing is that if you want to secure the peace, if you have a post-conflict situation, you're going to need jobs. One of the best predictors of ongoing conflict is no jobs, or a very unfair, exclusive disbursement of the jobs to certain groups. And if you're going to have jobs, that means you're going to need business, and you're going to need people who are going to be in there innovating and building an economy. How do you make that peace supporting is really innovative work that a range of actors, both public and private, are just engaging in now. So what we're doing, what we've drawn on in our work is essentially 20 years of peacemaking practice to set up what's called a Plus Peace framework, which really allows businesses to understand how they can contribute to peace, and when they're starting their operations and setting up businesses, and then continually tracks that over 7 to 10 years so that you have a peace supporting impact. And the other way is really to focus on democratizing the market so that entrepreneurs, who are often, you know, the ones who are trying to reconstruct conflict affected areas, are the ones benefiting. And that's trying to get investment, impact investment, access to market and capacity building to those entrepreneurs that normally miss out, who are the poorest, most, sort of disenfranchised in conflict affected countries. So I think we're going to talk about solutions later, but
Exactly.
gives a little idea of how we're approaching it.
Yeah, I think we want to hear about solutions. We'll start with you, Laurent. Sadly, the story of Rafael Moreno is only one among many. If we look at the last 20 years, over 1,600 journalists have been killed. So what solution have you developed to address the risks posed to journalists like Rafael Moreno?
Yes, so for instance, what we did after the killing of Rafael, because that's also what Rafael wanted, so he called us 1 week before, he shared with us what he was investigating, he told us to continue his work in case something happened, and right after this killing, we teamed up with a lot of other Colombian journalists and South American journalists and international reporters to continue the work of Rafael. This is the DNA of Forbidden Stories, continuing the work of others who have been silenced. Why we are doing that? We do that because we want to make sure people get access to critical information. And if you take a look for what kind of stories journalists have been killed, it's always very critical stories. Environmental crimes, of course, human rights violation, money laundering, corruption. So very crucial stories for all of us, for building democracies. Without that, it's impossible without that kind of information. So we need to continue those stories, this work, and we need to do that in a collaborative way. And this is what we are doing with Forbidden Stories. When a journalist is killed, we are teaming up with 100 journalists all around the world to make sure we are unstoppable. And nobody can stop the investigation because we're not one, we have 100. And we are teaming up with the Washington Post in the US, with Le Monde in France, with Folha in Brazil, with the 60 news organization and 150 reporters. And that's important not only to inform the public, not only to make sure that the story will survive, but also to send a strong signal to enemies of the free press, to the ones who killed Raphael and to the ones who set fire on Jagendra in India, that to tell them, you kill the messenger, you will never kill the message. So this is what we are doing, and one thing that that is helping us in doing that, we have developed what we call the Safe Box Network. So the Safe Box Network is a safe box where journalists at risk are sharing, protecting their ongoing investigation while they are still alive, because of course what we want is to dissuade the killers. And so people who are at risk, journalists who are at risk in Mexico, in Philippines, all around the world, are using that way, this mechanism, this Safe Box Network, dropping their stories so we know what they are investigating, we know what to do, we are asking them what to do if in case something happens. And most of the journalists are making loud the fact that they're not anymore alone. That we have many journalists in Paraguay, in Mexico, who say that for my own safety, I did protect that with forbidden stories. And this is key as well, because we know what is killing journalists. It's not only impunity, is the fact that the people are isolated. And most of the time, journalists who are killed are journalists who are operating from a remote area. They don't have any more newsroom behind them, and so they are alone. So we try to reconnect the journalists who are at risk with us who are not at risk from many parts of the world, to make sure that we will be unstoppable and to make sure that killing the journalists won't kill the story.
Liam, I'd like us to go back to Colombia. Yeah, I think deserves applause. Just going back to Colombia, one of your current projects is a cocoa business in the jungles of Colombia. And my question is simple. What does chocolate have to do with peace and the environment?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We didn't intend to get into the chocolate business when we started in Colombia, but much like journalists, we're working in Colombia on helping implement the economic side of the Accords, and much like journalists working at the fringes, reintegrating combatants have some of the same vulnerabilities. They need security, and one of the things they need the most is economic security. They don't have livelihoods. And as part of the peace process, they're having to make a really difficult transition from being a combatant, essentially, a soldier who fought a war for 10, 20, 30 years, to actually being an entrepreneur and running a business. And so what we do is we look at two main criteria when we're trying to help our climate-resilient entrepreneurs make that transition. The first one is what is the peace impact of the business? And particularly in Colombia, it's very hard for reintegrating combatants to get jobs, and even harder to actually start their own business and interact with the market, because ideologically they were a leftist, almost Marxist movement. So actually participating in capitalism for them is quite a step, a significant step. And so working with them to make that transition is the peace impact. Then you have to layer on a business that's actually going to work. And one of the great things about chocolate is there's more demand than supply. Everybody's eating chocolate. The Swiss eat the most, about 12 or 13 kilos per person per year, but it's rising everywhere, and there's a huge taste for it in Southeast Asia and China. So you get high prices, and in Colombia you also have some really unusual, interesting genetics and flavors. And the third thing that's happening with chocolate, it's becoming like coffee and wine, that people are not just eating mass-produced sort of sugary chocolate, they're now getting into unique terroirs, and so that means they'll pay a lot more for it. So once you layer that together, you get a product that's actually, profitable and is also going to have a significant peace impact. But it takes a lot of work, and that's one of the things that I think here in terms of solutions, there are entrepreneurs working at the fringes, and they really need support. They need capital. They don't need money to be given to them. They need investment. They need coaching and significant help to be able to participate in the global market. And then they need market access.
Anya, In situations like the Ukraine or Norway that you mentioned, what does the Clooney Foundation do to address these issues?
Thank you. I mean, obviously, for human rights organizations broadly, there are many ways of dealing with these issues. There is a more traditional human rights approach of documentation and advocacy, basically what's known as naming and shaming. So we don't do that. We are very much legally focused, if you like. We believe that the moment is now ripe for very tangible action. So we build cases. So we do our own investigations, both in the field, in currently quite a few places, including Ukraine. And we build cases that we bring either through so-called universal jurisdiction, so in countries like France, Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, and many others, where legislation allows for prosecution of international crimes, crimes that were committed outside of the country's borders. And also working with the International Criminal Court and national prosecutors, for example, in Ukraine. So through these different legal avenues, we represent survivors and provide them all sorts of support, not only legal, but also build the whole files that we work with the prosecutors and the police on, with the idea of eventually getting arrest warrants against the perpetrators, so that even if they're not currently in Germany, in France, or elsewhere, we can make the world small for them. That's the main, I would say, advocacy message. So we're trying to get to a place, for example, with Ukraine, where there are enough arrest warrants, not only against the top command, which ICC is dealing with, but against mid and high-level commanders, so that next time they go to Turkey or Emirates or other places where Russians continue to travel to, there will be an arrest warrant out there that would at least allow for their arrest and extradition. And then, of course, many can ask, is it really realistic that Turkey or Emirates would extradite somebody to France and Germany? And my only answer to that is that we don't know, but what I can guarantee is that there is no case and no arrest warrant, they will not be arrested and extradited. So that's our main line of work, supported in many cases with advocacy and communications, because part of this work is also creating a deterrent effect. Right? It's not just about this 1 or 2 or 15 generals that we would be able to get. It's about sending a message out there that accountability becomes the norm and impunity an exception.
Thank you. For the last question, I would like us to look to the future. And I would like each of you to share with us what opportunities lie ahead of us in terms of maybe encouraging more private sector investment in fragile contexts, regarding ending impunity, and regarding the protection of journalists under threat. So what are the opportunities? Liam, do you want to start? Or?
Yeah, I'll have a go at it. So I think the future, there are some really worrying trends with the environment, obviously, and we need to make massive change in the next 5 to 10 years. One of the challenges that you have with the global financial architecture is it cannot make a deal under about 2 million. So all the development finance institutions, the World Bank and others, have really struggled to get down to that entrepreneur level, those people that have the great ideas and are excited and need access to capital. But what we do have is an extremely advanced, vibrant venture capital ecosystem now globally that does this in developed countries. So I think when we look ahead, there are 3 things that need to happen. One, we need new institutions or new financial instruments that are able to back entrepreneurs in developing countries. So that means developing things like peace venture funds or environment venture funds that are going to get out there and take a chance. The second one is, and what investors say, is we need a stock exchange. What they see at the moment with SDGs and impact investing and things like this is a whole potpourri of different approaches and different metrics and things like that. They actually want a global stock exchange so they can have confidence when they're investing in something that it is actually going to have an impact. And then the final thing, I think, is demonstrating success, that the changemakers need to get out there and communicate it like we are here and at the conference. So I think showing that you can actually build, for us, build businesses in Yemen and Afghanistan and conflict-affected parts of Colombia and deliver a peace plus profit return while supporting the environment. I think they're three things we can do looking forward.
Thank you. Anna, what about justice?
Well, international justice project is long, or the arc of moral universe is long, but we hope it bends towards justice. However, I do think we're now at an incredible moment. And the most tragic developments in Ukraine are in some ways at the same time, for me, are a hopeful trigger of some of these processes. So this system has been built over decades, and now I think we're putting it to test with basically new practical avenues that I just described in terms of universal jurisdiction, with the kind of increasingly recognized role of the civil society, journalists, organizations, national and international, that can really support very small war crimes units that exist in most countries, if at all. But it's also our ability to investigate, to document these crimes with all the opportunities of open source intelligence gathering now with artificial intelligence and all of that. We're really in a completely different place from where we were 20 years ago. And specifically on environmental crimes, where I think in a particularly pivotal moment, I'm sure many of you are following international developments here, where I do think we will be talking in very different terms even a year from now, with the recognition of ecocide becoming an absolutely internationally accepted norm, and its incorporation as a crime at various levels, from International Criminal Court to national jurisdictions. And that would allow a completely different playing field for pursuing crimes that are specifically related to harm caused to the environment.
Thank you.
Yes.
And Laurent?
Yeah, regarding the killing of journalists and the access to information, I think one of the big challenges here is that all of us, at some point, we get used to the numbers, or every morning in the radio we might hear some information about a new journalist has been killed in Mexico, or a new journalist has been jailed in the Philippines. And at the end, the big challenge for all of us is to get used to that kind of metrics, that kind of statistics. And we have to think that the killing of a journalist somewhere in India or in Philippines, it's not only a story that is related only to Philippines. It's all connected. The gold mine that is mined, the gold that is mined in Tanzania is then traveling to the Silicon Valley, and then it's all in our iPhone today. The same for Khadija Ismailova in Azerbaijan, who was jailed for more than 1 year. She was investigating the ruling family, who is corrupting many companies in Europe, many politicians in the European Parliament as well. So it's all connected. So facing that kind of global crime, we need a global network. So to change that, we need to encourage more and more journalists as well to work together, which is difficult, because it's a lot about egos, it's a lot about the way we have been trained for years to be lone wolf reporters, and to think that I will be alone on stage with my award, with my sources, with my editor, and I don't want to share the light with others, or I don't want to share my information with my competitors. But we have to change that, because collaboration is bringing protection, and so it doesn't make sense to kill one of us if we are 50 others who are doing the same story. So, but to change that, we need to train and to teach collaborative journalism I think in all schools of journalism all over the world. This is really key. And at the end, I think one of the things that we all have to do is to think about all those stories that journalists have been killed for. So we can all share the work of Forbidden Stories partners. When we are publishing a project, you can all go on the website of Forbidden Stories, on the Washington Post website, to share those very important stories, because those reporters have been killed for that and for all of us.
Thank you. I want to thank you so much for the incredible work that you do. And I would like us to show respect for the cause of our three panelists. Thank you so much.